I'll say barefaced lies. I'll say barefaced lies. I'll say barefaced lies. Again, barefaced lies. I'll say barefaced lies. I'll say barefaced lies. I'll say barefaced lies. Again.
That's right, yeah, we got an agenda. And it's your money we're gonna spend, yeah. Because we want where it's all gonna end, yeah. If you think we ever wanna defend, yeah. Cause when the truth becomes so easy to disguise, you get shooting cold, overgrown, postal road, barefaced lies.
Barefaced lies. Barefaced lies.
Hey Sean, you got a party? You got that little party going on there. Keep to the left, you can't think right, so everything you do goes wrong, yeah. Incompetence just leads to disaster. Corruption brings it on even faster. What you say?
That's right, yeah, we got an agenda. And it's your money we're gonna spend, yeah. Because we want where it's all gonna end, yeah. If you think we ever wanna defend, yeah. Cause when the truth becomes so easy to disguise, you get shit cold, overgrown, postal road, barefaced. That's right, yeah, we got an agenda. And it's your money we're gonna spend, yeah. Because we want where it's all gonna end, yeah. If you think we ever wanna defend, yeah. Cause when the truth becomes so easy to disguise, you get shit cold, overgrown, postal road, barefaced lies.
Barefaced lies. Barefaced lies.
Comrades, you always told us you'd build us all a new Jerusalem, yeah. You talk the talk, but when you walk, you only leave a crooked line there. And you don't see the trouble that's brewing if all you do is just what you're doing.
That's right, yeah, we got an agenda. And it's your money we're gonna spend, yeah. Do you wonder where it's all gonna end, yeah. Do you think we ever wanna defend, yeah. Cause when the truth becomes so easy to disguise, you get shit cold, overgrown, postal road, barefaced lies.
Is this where you wanna be? Debt and childhood poverty. Oh, somebody set us free from this corrupt kleptocracy. Oh yeah.
Barefaced lies.
That's right, yeah, we got an agenda. And it's your money we're gonna spend, yeah. Do you wonder where it's all gonna end, yeah. Do you think we ever wanna defend, yeah. Cause when the truth becomes so easy to disguise, you get shit cold, overgrown, postal road, barefaced. That's right, yeah, we got an agenda. And it's your money we're gonna spend, yeah. Do you wonder where it's all gonna end, yeah. Do you think we ever wanna defend, yeah. Cause when the truth becomes so easy to disguise, you get shit cold, overgrown, postal road, barefaced. That's right, yeah, we got an agenda.
Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them. On the 20th of November 2003, James Ignatius O'Rourke McMahon was elected councillor for the Failsworth East Ward of Oldham. Deeply ambitious, he ruthlessly rose to power, and by 2011 he was already leader of the council. In 2015, exploiting a Labour Party loophole, he became MP for Oldham West and Royton. If only the people of the town knew then what they now know. Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them.
This isn't just another story. This is about the systemic betrayal of vulnerable children, a web of institutional silence that spans decades, and the ongoing fight to expose the truth that powerful politicians desperately want to keep hidden. This isn't a conspiracy, no matter how many times they try and tell you it is. What we share, these are facts, documented, verifiable facts that have been meticulously uncovered through years of relentless campaigning and the pursuit of the truth. If you believe in justice, if you care about protecting the most vulnerable in our society, you need to understand something as simple as this. Having sold the nation's daughters for votes, the Labour Party are doing everything that they can do to prevent any genuine investigation that would identify exactly those who are responsible and hold them to account. As for Tom Crowther, the judge they tried to bring in as part of the clean-up crew, I don't think he quite yet understands what he has exposed himself into. We have been at this for 6 years, and we have defeated every one of them that they put up against us. Because in the end, the truth is the truth. And these people, from Andy Burnham, Yvette Cooper, Angela Rayner, Debbie Abrahams, Jim McMahon, all the way to the lowly local level councillors such as Arood Shah, Amanda Chadderton, Sean Fielding. And I talk about one town, but it's the same in at least 50 towns and cities across this country. It is the same. Which is why they continue to refuse something that is just, well, perhaps they think they can avoid what is coming. I don't. It is only a matter of time. A very, very good evening to all of you. I was here last night and I'm here again. My name is Raja Amir and I am responsible for the Recusant 9 transmissions. It is my work from the corner of a retreating corner of my living room from my daughter's ever-expanding Lego collection that I have been delivering these Recusant 9 transmissions and just writing and sharing content for year on year on year, day after day after day, and that's how we win. We remain consistent, we remain honest, and we keep at it, knowing that the odds are stacked against us, but also knowing that in the end, it is the actions of ordinary people that in the end make the difference. So, I promised you this evening we'd go through Tom Crowther's testimony at the Home Affairs Select Committee. Now, I've testified at the Home Affairs Select Committee in my time. It is a very powerful government committee that is meant to be essentially oversight, scrutiny, meant to look at anything and everything that is of importance to the nation. So they summoned Tom Crowther and he attended. And the more I look at it, the more I listen to it, the more it's clear to me that there is another game being played here between Crowther himself and the Home Office, the government, because he well and truly, he threw them under the bus. He also was humiliated through the process, but I don't think he cares. And it is my belief that Tom Crowther is desperately looking for a way out. So I've got my headphones. I've got the recording. What I do will be play a bit, pause, talk, play a bit, pause, talk. If you've got questions, put them up. Thank you so much. I don't think I put this up yet. And thank you, Rian, for your super chat as well. And we will go make our way through this. My work is 100% community funded. I appreciate it's sunny and it's the holidays and all of that, but my numbers are increasing at a, let's say, extremely modest rate. So I know I know because the analytics tell me the vast majority of you who engage in my work do not subscribe even to the YouTube channel, which is free. It takes 2 seconds to click. But please do consider buying me a coffee. It's £3 to you. Or better still, signing up to Red Wall and the Rabble. Someone said to me earlier today, why are you asking money for? Well, actually, this is how, after everything else, this is how I earn my living. So that's why I ask people to subscribe. And of course, subscription is free. You don't have to pay. We do need numbers. So please subscribe to Red Wall and the Rabble, even if you're subscribing for free. Subscribe if you can, £3 a month or just £30 for the full year. And you're done. And you can feel okay because you're part of, you're part of the team, a small team that keeps me going. And if you can't do that, at the very least, consider buying me a coffee. I'm sorry, mate. I've not seen whatever it is you've sent me, Harry. I spend most of my time working, I'm afraid, so I don't always look at Facebook Messenger, so I'm not sure what it is you've sent me. Yeah. So, please, thank you. I'm not sure about any of that, really, Karen. I know they're trying to bury this, but they're trying to bury this long before Rupert Lowe came along. Rupert Lowe really came along around January time. They've been trying to bury this and bury yours for the last 6 years. And others before. I like you think slow and steady is better, but I don't think slow and steady is better, if I'm honest with you, because our numbers aren't increasing anywhere near the levels they should be compared to what we've lost. So it's easy to say slow and steady. And of course, if the government get their way, this opportunity will go, this wave will go, and that's the end of it. And of course, that's that, isn't it, Gary? You've been with me, been in courtroom after courtroom with me, as was some of the others. 5 years solicitors most definitely are not free. I'm paying one at the moment. Sent me another bill for another £1,200. That's much more than I earn in a month. So What do I say? Okay. Please, if you find value, at the very least, like the bloody thing, yeah? And I'll check. No coffees, no subscriptions. Let's get on with this evening's transmission.
Recommendations from Professor Alexis Jay's report on the independent child sexual abuse inquiry, and the recommendations that were made and how those recommendations are being implemented by the government. So we're very grateful to have you here. I don't know if you want to make an opening statement.
No, thank you.
Okay, in that case, let me turn to Belle Ribeiro Addy.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for answering our questions today. I want to start by asking what were the key lessons you learnt about the process of conducting an inquiry from this particular Telford inquiry?
Key lessons from Telford were that the survivors of CSE were part of it from the very start. I wouldn't say that's a lesson for any form of inquiry, particularly statutory inquiries, which have to be constituted according to the Inquiries Act. But because we weren't statutory, we had greater freedom to involve survivors from the start.
Is there anything you would do differently or caution others against?
Well, Telford was not the first of its type. I think the non-statutory local inquiries probably began in the modern sense with Alexis Jay and Rotherham in 2013. But Telford had a formal structure, which was, I think, novel. What was sometimes called, in that the council commissioned a law firm to hire another to be the commissioning body, which then hired me. Looking at that now, and having spoken to others involved in what became the commissioning body, was Evershed Sutherland, the law firm. Whether it's necessary to have that degree of double independence, I'm not sure. It certainly gave credibility to the inquiry's independence, but may have been a belt and braces approach that wasn't necessary and was expensive for Telford. I just don't know how much Telford paid in the first tranche. I know there's been mismatch between what I know to have been the cost of the inquiry with which I was involved and the overall bill to Telford. The figure I recognise is about 5 million. The figure bandied about by Nadine Dorries and others is nearer 8. I don't know if the 8 has justification or comes from that first layer of commissioning another law firm to do it. And what I would say then is lessons learnt. What is vital is having survivor buy-in and approval, but it may not be necessary to do it in that particularly structured way. I should say, of course, and should have said, that the best person to answer questions about the detail of the commissioning of Telford is your colleague Sean Davis, and I should at the start, when you invited me to give an opening statement, to have declared an interest to the extent that I have met Sean Davis, particularly during the review of progressive recommendations last year, but it's no more than that.
He's sent apologies and can't be here, I'm afraid, this evening, but this afternoon, but he has always declared his interest on that.
And you've made, you've referenced the freedom of having a non-statutory inquiry, but do you think the ability to compel witnesses would have made would have made a difference, would have been better?
Well, I addressed this in the Telford report, and the reality is I don't think it would have made a difference in Telford. Where the express power exists to compel witnesses, be it in a statutory inquiry or in a court, it's always worth remembering that if a witness says they simply don't remember, there's nothing you can do to compel an answer out of a witness like that. You can compel them to come to court, but as you can lead a horse to water, you can't make that horse drink. And even a statutory inquiry can't compel self-incriminatory evidence to be given without giving an undertaking not to prosecute. So it seems to me that the power of compulsion, while it's much vaunted at the moment, and it's always presented as the huge advantage of a statutory inquiry, didn't make a difference in Telford, and perhaps is worth less than it's sometimes said to be. I should say there are other powers. In Telford, we issued notices under Section 10 of the Children Act 2004 to the council's relevant partners to cooperate in the inquiry, and there was no pushback at that. We also had the power to name witnesses who were reluctant, who didn't cooperate, and I did name 4 witnesses whose non-participation disappointed me. But I don't think the non-participation of those witnesses made a material difference to my conclusions. There's one other thing to remember, of course. All the way through Telford, because bluntly the Survivors Committee wanted a statutory inquiry from the start and right up until the moment where I published my final report, when they accepted nothing more could have been done. But right the way through Telford, we had in mind that we could apply under Section 15 of the Inquiries Act for a conversion of the inquiry to a statutory form. Now, the Home Secretary might have needed some persuading. But these days, with, for example, Oldham, which is in its very early stages and which I also chair, if an inquiry chair, me or someone else, issues an interim report which says I cannot answer these questions without statutory powers, I'd be very surprised if any Home Secretary these days were to say, I'm not granting you them for those limited purposes. So it's not a decision made once and for all, and there's flexibility.
You mentioned...
Okay, I'm going to pause in sections. This might go on for a while, so if you're used to me doing this, you'll be fine with it. You might end up with me till later on in the evening. You might come back tomorrow. You might get bored and think, what on earth is that man doing? That's entirely up to you. Thank you so much, Karen, for signing up. I'm very, very grateful. It's it makes a difference to me, but it makes a massive difference. Okay, so he launches into it straight away and talks about the key lessons from Telford, and he only gives one key lesson from Telford, which is survivors are part of it from the start. Now in Oldham, if you were at the last council meeting where they tried to fudge this, you'll have heard the survivors shouting and screaming at the councillors for manipulating them. You can go back and listen to it if you want. And survivors from the start have been adversarial. Survivors and campaigners from the start have been adversarial because the council has repeatedly lied, misled, deceived and prevented any form of genuine investigation, including Andy Burnham's sham assurance review. So the survivors are not, if they are part of it from the start, they are adversarial, Mr. Crowther. So in that, Oldham is very, very different right from the beginning. There's already been an inquiry. And that inquiry was proven to be a cover-up. Andy Burnham's exact words to his assurance review is it was limited 2.5 years later as a consequence of our campaigning. Now, Oldham Council to this day do not, and neither does Tom Crowther, do not specify how many survivors are involved and in what capacity they're involved, and of course whether they have, you know, the skills and experiences to be involved, which is another question. So we know survivors are not involved in it from the start in Oldham. We know the relationship is adversarial with the council and its partners, and we also know that the council is hiding the figures. So much so that they've brought in COGS, Keeping Our Girls Safe, a council-funded organisation. They've been funding it for the best part of 15 years. Council-funded and Greater Manchester Police-funded to be that interface. So they're not going to rock the boat, are they? They're not going to be independent. So that's what he says the key lesson from Telford was. You can see the contradiction. You can see the contradiction right from the offset with Oldham. Thank you, Denise. You were at the meeting. He's then asked what he would do differently. And this is where he's trying to immediately reframe what the world recognises as a Telford-style inquiry. And he starts off by focusing on that himself. The Telford-style inquiry guaranteed independence. It was a double independence model. A law firm was appointed by the council who hired another law firm who advertised and hired him in the Guardian job section, as we're later to find out. Now he's saying, and remember, what would he do differently? He's hypothesizing. He doesn't know. He's saying he doesn't know. Yet he's saying he wouldn't necessarily do that. He's not sure if it's required. It might be too expensive. Of course, in Oldham, without the guarantee of independence, as a direct consequence of the history of what's took place, this cover-up will not be accepted. This inquiry, no matter what it does, will be seen as a cover-up. So he knows that, which is why immediately he's trying to mitigate it by saying, perhaps we don't need the double independence. Although he does admit and acknowledge that whilst he might not be sure, those involved from giving testimony and whatnot were reassured by that independence. Put yourself in the position of a whistleblower. Would you go and give evidence to a judge who's been appointed by the council, working through solicitors who've been funded by the council, aided by witness support, who've always been funded by the council? You wouldn't, would you? So he's speculating it's not needed. However, when Oldham forced this vote last year, the first of the votes, whereas to write to the government asking for a public inquiry, and if not, that Oldham would commission a Telford-style inquiry. The key feature of a Telford-style inquiry was the independence, the double independence model. Essentially, to remove as far as possible the council, the police, and any of those incriminated from being anywhere near the nuts and bolts of the investigation. He may be a KC, but he will not be able to disagree with me on that feature. And now, what Arooj Shah, Pakistani council leader, Muslim council leader, those identity markers do matter because it's perception. We know who the perpetrator community is in Oldham. She's fixing this, as is the chief executive, Shelley Kipling, who worked for the communications team neck deep in the cover-up at the time. He then, when asked what he would do differently, also speculates that it might not need as much money spending on it. But hand in hand with that speculation, he acknowledges himself he doesn't know. Because the financial aspects of it are not something that his expertise is in. So straight away, he's trying to nudge, constrain the parameters of what is going to happen in the future in Oldham and elsewhere by saying we don't need it to be independent and we don't need to spend as much money on it. Indeed, Sheila, indeed. And he reflects in the end by saying it's vital having survivors' buy-in and approval, but he's not sure of the independence of the finances required. He doesn't say any of those from a position of experience. So straight away, I'm not comfortable with what he starts off with. Remember, he's giving testimony here. He's a judge. He's the chair of the Telford inquiry. He's sharing a series of assumptions that are not based upon any form of evidence. And this continues to the ridiculous, where he, when asked about compelling witnesses, he believes it doesn't. He didn't think it would make a difference, in Telford anyway, as people could just say they don't remember. Of course, it'd be hard for them to say don't remember when other witness statements are given and presented to them. It'd be hard for people to say don't remember when minutes of meetings or the testimonies of survivors are presented to them. Yes, he believes that don't remember will be the get out clause. And anyway, he has the power to name witnesses who did not turn up. That's really going to make a difference. Thank you, Jackie. Now, what he is trying to do, and he's walking a tightrope here as well, he makes reference to other powers. And I'm pretty sure that's a carrot to those of us. He knows we're campaigning. He knows who we are. He knows what we're doing. He knows what he's up against. And that Section 15 of the Inquiries Act means that he has the power, as the chair at any point, to say, I need statutory powers to get to the truth. And he'll go back to the Home Office. So the obvious question would be, under what circumstances does he envisage he would need to go back to the Home Office and ask for statutory powers? And the lady who's asking the questions, she misses when she talks about compelling witnesses. There's something actually equally as important that a statutory inquiry has. It has powers to go after the evidence. It is not reliant on those being investigated to hand over the files that the investigators use to investigate them. Yeah. And he says nothing on that at this point. So that's the introduction. Okay. Thank you, Jackie, for becoming a member. And if you are able to, that's the webpage. where all of this goes up and the more detailed analysis goes up, redwall.co.uk. Please do consider going and subscribing there. Makes a massive difference to me. Thank you, Jake. Let's continue.
Oldham, but I was wondering if you could say how you might compare the Telford inquiry to other local or national inquiries into child sexual exploitation like Rotherham or Rochdale.
Alexis Jay's Rotherham inquiry was admirably quick and has been widely praised. All the other local inquiries have been widely praised. I know Mr. Moore has a long-standing, I did a little bit of research before I came in, a long-standing interest, and I know that Mr. Moore, in calling for an inquiry in his area, has for years been calling for a Rotherham-style inquiry because it was so praised. I'm happy to say that Telford had praise as well and satisfied the survivors. So I'm not going to offer comparisons. Oldham is in its very earliest stages. We are not, I have been appointed, solicitors to the inquiry are going to be appointed, and that's in hand with the local authority. That's their job, not mine. But they've made other arrangements to satisfy themselves of the buy-in of survivors rather than adopting the double independent model that I've talked about. They're not hiring one firm to hire another.
And are you aware of specific actions that have been taken to ensure that the lessons from the inquiry have been learnt or improved multi-agency cooperation in any way?
Are you talking about other local authorities or Telford?
Both, actually. I mean, what specific actions have been taken there, and has there been any work to make sure that the lessons have been learnt by others?
Yeah, I mean, Telford, I gave 47 recommendations, but it was part of the original contract with Telford that I'd come back after 2 years and have a review of progress against recommendations. This is long before I even knew what recommendations there would be. It was part of the original, as I say, contract terms. So this time last year, almost exactly, I spent a fortnight in Telford meeting teachers, social workers, police officers at all levels of seniority to see what progress had been made. And I'm delighted to say that Telford have done a really impressive job at not only implementing the recommendations that I made, but thinking about those recommendations, thinking around them, and involving survivors in how they implemented those recommendations. So far as Oldham's concerned, it's far too soon to say anything, because while I've been instructed, until solicitors to the inquiry are instructed, I can't have any public communications or anything of that sort. It is a fact that I've been instructed, but that's really all that that has happened so far that I can say publicly. There has been, and the only contact I've had with them, but for an early meeting with the leader and the chief executive, has been through the legal department with my clerk to Chambers.
Thank you. And are there any particular skills that a council should be looking for in the people that lead on their own similar inquiry?
Well, modesty forbids. So far as I was concerned, when I was recruited, there was an advert in Guardian Jobs for the chair of the Telford inquiry. And it required some legal background. It also required interviews with not only the commissioning body, but also, once they had their shortlist, with a survivors committee. And I think I was assisted by my background not only had I spent 20 years as a barrister prosecuting serious sexual offences, but I'd spent the best part of 6 years as a full-time circuit judge trying serious sexual offences. And I came to the judicial role in 2013, which is just when the sea change in how the judiciary treats vulnerable witnesses, and all victims of sexual offending are regarded as vulnerable witnesses. This sea change had occurred, which was about, we'd now call it being trauma-informed, but it's about seeing that the journey of a witness through the system was as easy as it could possibly be. And I think that informed how I wanted to set up the Telford inquiry. And what I wanted, bluntly, was it to look nothing like a court. And it did look nothing like a court. Now, that was another advantage of not being in statutory form. We didn't have to have counsel to the inquiry. We didn't have to have a bank of barristers for key participants asking questions. I said at a seminar once, no one was cross-examined, and some smart Alex said to me, well, of course, no one's cross-examined in an inquiry. It's all examination by different parties. To which I said, yes, but it feels like cross-examination.
Yes.
And that was the point. We had people come and talk to us. We'd have tea and biscuits and take their witness statements. Just let them talk and record it. And not take notes, but produce a transcript later. So that people could just give their accounts in the way they felt most comfortable. And some people were able to participate in that way. Still, others couldn't. We went to people's houses. You know, we had a flexibility that wouldn't have been open to us on a statutory basis. And I think that's why we got the engagement we did, and that's why it was a success.
And do you think that your experiences running the inquiry could be replicated?
Well, I've cut you off. I'm so sorry.
No, go on.
Well, I'm absolutely hoping to replicate that in Oldham. Yes.
But I suppose it's different because it's yourself, so you would definitely replicate them. Do you think it's something that you could impart onto others who are leading such inquiries? Do you think it would be appropriate in other places?
Well, you can set out a framework. You can set out a framework. There's no doubt about that. But it's up to individual local authorities to determine who they hire to chair these things.
And were there any particular resources that you were given that allowed you to run it in this way? Or is it the standard amount of resources and you quite simply put it into a framework that made the most sense and got the best results?
The brief from Telford to Eversheds was to run an independent inquiry. So there was a great deal of thought given by the team in Eversheds, who are experts, and me, bringing a different perspective, to how we could fairly run an inquiry on a non-traditional basis.
Thank you.
Can I just ask, forgive me, this is my ignorance, but you said it was advertised in Guardian Jobs. Was the role advertised anywhere else?
Oh, good question. I don't know.
Okay, but that's where you saw it. Okay, thank you. Robbie Moore.
Okay, let me get these headphones up. I borrowed them off when it was in his teenage years, my brother. Some DJ, so these headphones are something. They're very comfy, but they're very, very tight. Okay. He's asked a question about lessons learned, and he intentionally, in my opinion, intentionally, because he's a KC, but he might not be, he misunderstands the question. He talks about lessons learned, and he says, oh yeah, Telford learned lessons. No, what the focus of the question was, what did you learn in Telford around your methodology that would then be replicated and used elsewhere that would be a benefit? And that's what the question was. But he wanted to talk about his 47 recommendations in Telford and how he went back after 2 years and inspected progress. His lessons learned, again, he makes reference to involving survivors. And, of course, in terms of particular skills for those who are involved in the inquiry apart from him, modesty forbids. He acknowledges he saw the job advertised in The Guardian, and he was interviewed for the job, including survivors and others interviewed him. So, whilst his appointment in Telford went through an open and transparent process, in Oldham it gets murky. In Oldham, he acknowledges the inquiry is in its earlier stages and he has already been appointed. He acknowledges that he met with the leader and the chief executive. And then the legal team is headed up by a man called Alexander Bogotoff, backdoor Bogotoff, interim appointment, Bent Bogotoff. Attempted to try and take out an injunction against me to stop me from campaigning. So these are individuals who are neck deep in the cover-up. He's already meeting with. And it appears that he was just given the job. It appears he was just given the job. He doesn't say how much he's been paid. So all of that is, if you're familiar with Oldham and the corruption and the dodgy deals that infest the town, the manner in which Tom Crowther has been appointed in Oldham simply reflects the working practices of a town that is arguably the most corrupt in the country. And I agree with you, Kev. In my opinion, Telford was a failure because no one was prosecuted. And how many of the rape gangs were charged and convicted? A handful? We know there were thousands of victims. He said so himself. Did they identify the thousands? No. How many were convicted? Half a dozen? His definition of a success is very different to my definition of a success. Which is perhaps why he says all the other inquiries have been widely praised. We have consistently found shortcomings in all the other inquiries, including the Rotherham inquiry, where the Rotherham investigator found shortcomings in her own inquiry and her ability to conduct an investigation. So I'm not sure where or how he's rewriting history. We know the Rochdale inquiry was a joke. We know Andy Burnham's Manchester inquiry around Operation Augusta. It reported that minutes had been lost and just left it there. Those are the minutes that closed down an investigation that let just under 100 rape gang members escape. So the only people doing the praising are either the gullible that he charmed with tea and biscuits, or those who've been sweating and got away with it. He again references other arrangements being made in Oldham. So the double independence is not there. Who said other arrangements could be made in the town when the council voted for a Telford-style inquiry if a statutory inquiry was not to be permitted? Who had the authority to change that? Arud Shah definitely didn't. And Shelley Kipling most definitely didn't either. The problem is, and I know many of you are now here from elsewhere in the country, indeed the world, if you are familiar with the campaigning in Oldham, it's me doing it from here, cajoling, encouraging, and the councillors, the majority, are bent or cowardly. He also talks about how his perspective and why it's better than a statutory inquiry is because he doesn't want it to look like a court. We can sit down informally with people, have tea and biscuits. Yes, he can do all of that. And there's nothing in a statutory inquiry preventing you from doing that either, prior to the evidence giving, which should be like a court, because this is serious, Tom. And what he omits there, of course, is whilst we accept and understand survivors, their families, need additional support for police officers, for council staff, for politicians. Do you want it informal? A chat over tea and biscuits? Or do you want the full scrutiny of a court-like environment, where they're made to answer questions under oath and cross-examined in a way that they should be? It wouldn't surprise me if it's them, or let's see who else it can be. I've got a list of them, mate, of who've come after me from Oldham Council. So let's see who the solicitors are. Okay. You think you'll do a runner like the last three did? Right, let's continue. Give me 1 second. Let me just wipe my my notepad. I've got a notepad here in front of me whilst I'm listening and writing and summarising as we go along. This is my intention. I'm going to do it like this, if it's okay with you. So tell me if you'd rather me just play it through and we have a chat afterwards. So if you'd like that instead, let me know, and I can happily do that. Or I can continue like this. Also, thank you to the 2 or 3 of you who've either bought me a samosa, a coffee, or subscribed to Red Wall and the Rabble. I'll put it back up. Try and encourage over 400 of you. Try and encourage maybe, 2 or 3 of you perhaps to take out a subscription to Red Wall and the Rabble. I would be very grateful. And if you already have, or if you're not that way inclined, perhaps buy me a coffee or support me via PayPal. The work I do, this is what I'm doing. I think you can see it by now. No one else has, and no one else will. Okay, I'll continue like this.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good to see you. So thank you very much for coming in. Just following on, actually, before I go on to my next question, just to do with Telford specifically. Reading the Telford report, it contains some horrific, absolutely horrific findings, where there had been multi-agency failings from not only the police but children's services and those with safeguarding responsibilities as a whole, including the council leadership itself. So, can I ask, after all of that and the huge amount of work that had been put into the Telford inquiry, including its outreach with victims, was a single person reprimanded as a result of the inquiry, sacked or held to account?
Well, it's not the inquiry's job to attribute liability.
Are you aware, though, following the inquiry, if anyone has been held account?
I'm aware that some people are no longer in the roles they were in, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And
if I might say this, I was dealing with failures in the 90s and in the 2000s in particular. And while there were failures in the 2010s, the most egregious failings were 20 years plus ago.
So, can I just expand on another point that you made there to do with statutory inquiries in the answer that you gave to Bell. The way in which the questioning and the environment that is created to be able to question and allow those that have gone through the most horrific of circumstances, the victims, the survivors, to come forward and share their experiences. I just want to get to the bottom of this whether on a statutory powers or non-statutory powers, why do you feel that you have more flexibility in the mechanisms of which Telford was set up to be able to allow the circumstances of questioning that you went with Telford on the basis of not having the compulsory powers, statutory powers that are associated with it?
Because a statutory inquiry effectively has to be set up along a courtroom model. That's why.
Do you have flexibility, even if you're given statutory powers, to change the way in which the questioning takes place?
Well, I talked about transformation of a non-statutory to a statutory, and I said if that were to be the case, what we'd have to do is have an interim report which would identify the issues which would need to be done on a statutory basis. You'd then have to identify who are your key participants in a statutory inquiry. You'd then have to work out how to make disclosure, given that you'd given privacy guarantees to people who'd given evidence, and whether those issues could be illuminated sufficiently without causing difficulties for those privacy guarantees you'd given. It's difficult, but it's possible. My firm view is if you start... It's a difference between whether you're interested in a local problem or a national problem. And there are differences. And if I can deal with that. Are you interested in what's going on in my town, my locale, my constituency? Or are you interested in what's gone wrong nationally, what societal, cultural, policy failings there may have been? Because if it's the latter, then there may well be an argument for a national reflection on just why so many people in so many towns over so long in a developing multicultural Britain felt unable to speak up. Why some people thought when people did speak up that they were wrong to do so because they were making allegations that a person of a particular race had behaved badly. Why some people thought crime was excusable if viewed through a prism of the perpetrator being somebody who had been subject to prejudice themselves. Now, that's a national issue. That can't be decided on a town-by-town basis. But equally, if you want to know, in your town, were decisions taken not to allocate social services resources in a particular way because girls, and it was mostly girls, were regarded as badly behaved, or to use a word that cropped up in Telford, feral? If you want to know why social services departments took a view of working together that was overly narrow and didn't properly encompass exploitation, if you want to know which local police commanders or areas wanted to drop ideas of, I'm going to call it what they called it, child prostitution, like a hot potato, because it was too difficult, then you need a local inquiry. You need something like Telford. Because one of the first things I said when I did press 2 years ago when the report came out was, do not think this is a problem just of the pariah towns. This will be happening in some form just about everywhere. It may not be happening with the racial paradigm that's currently in the news, but child sexual exploitation will be happening somewhere. And if you want to know what's happening in your town, you need the sort of granular investigation that we had in Telford. And it took 2 years. I'm very sorry, I am rolling on with myself.
No, please.
Fine.
It took 2 years. It took 3, rather, because it should have taken 2, but we had COVID in the middle. And as you'd imagine, both the police and the council, the core participants, were absolutely in the front line of COVID. So it took us 3 years. I think to do the sort of job we did on Telford anywhere else, in ideal circumstances, would take 18 months to 2. But if you've got the 5 towns the Home Secretary spoke of, including Oldham, in a national inquiry, then you either need an absolutely massive team to do these concurrently, or you're going to take 10 years to do it. Which is why my view is firmly that for local answers, local inquiries are the solution. Of course there are problems, and I know this isn't interest of yours. How on earth do you persuade a local authority to commission when they don't want to? And I've got views about that, but I'm running on beyond your question, so I'll stop.
Well, no, because I will continue that line of thinking, if that's okay. So in terms of the framework and the methodology that is going to be rolled out in looking at these, we know Oldham is going to be one of them, but the additional 4 local inquiries, local audits that are going to be announced by the Home Secretary.
Well, can I just say, Oldham, having been told by the Minister for Safeguarding last October that the government would not have an inquiry into Oldham, made a decision then to have its own local inquiry. So Oldham's decision was, I think, separate from what happened in January of this year.
Okay.
Just as, I should say, Telford's decision, in the teeth of local council opposition, Mr Davis would tell you that he was not a fan in 2017 or thereabouts and changed his mind. Telford's inquiry came because of pushing by Geraldine McKelvey of the Sunday Mirror in particular, Lucy Allen, your erstwhile colleague, and most of all, a cohesive and determined survivors group.
So continuing that line of thought,
yeah.
And you've obviously referenced myself in terms of the local campaigning that I have been doing for having an inquiry within Keighley and across the wider Bradford district. Yeah. Should the Bradford district be one of those 5 that the Home Secretary announces before Easter?
Well, I'm not going to say, I don't even know if she's going to announce 5 before Easter, and which is why I separated Oldham from the 5. They have announced an inquiry, and they've hired me, and they're doing this inquiry, whatever the Home Secretary announces. That's my understanding. As to the others, I do not know enough about towns across the land, including yours, or districts across the land, to say which should have an inquiry and which shouldn't. I think I'd answer it in this way. If there is sufficient local concern, then local authorities should be thinking about having an inquiry, whether it be the sort of inquiry I conducted in Telford, or whether it be something more along the lines of the ICSA Truth Project, which is, it's an earlier stage really. It's about allowing people to tell their stories and thereby gaining an idea of the extent of the problem.
So again, Chair, if you may, so just take my example, okay? So I've been advocating, as indeed predecessors of mine, Anne Cryer, had been, for an inquiry to take place across the Bradford district, okay? And
can I, Anne Cryer is a hero of the peace. Everyone knows Anne Cryer is an absolute hero of the peace. And
absolutely. And she was a predecessor of mine representing Keighley. But the stark reality that we face across the Bradford district is we have and let me just take you through a timeline of events. So July 2021, Bradford Safeguarding Partnership rejects a full inquiry, arguing that the limited review that they carried out based on the experiences of only 5 children was sufficient. September 2021, the Deputy Mayor for Policing, Alison Lowe, directly rejects my calls for a full-scale inquiry, arguing that the challenges across the Bradford district is not a Bradford problem, it is solely a national problem. In October 2021, we have the same response coming from the Bradford Council leader, Susan Hinchcliffe, rejecting calls for a local inquiry. December 2023, Bradford Council rejects my petition, again, which has been signed by well over 5,000 people for an inquiry to be held across the Bradford district. And then literally at the beginning of this year, we've had leading lawyers that have been representing many of those that were involved in the Rotherham cases, arguing for an inquiry to take place. Indeed, we had a duly signed letter that went to the Home Secretary early this year, signed by me, signed by victims, signed by a leading lawyer in this field. We haven't even had a response to that. My point being, when you're in a scenario like me, where that is very different almost to Telford and Oldham, which Telford and Oldham, correct me if I'm wrong, but those local authorities were keen for an inquiry to take place, but Bradford are not. How do you then trigger an inquiry to take place across the Bradford district?
Telford wasn't keen.
But it approved it in the end.
In the end, it did. And
We're
I was
still
going to
fa-
say,
you know.
I think you're at Telford in 2017.
So how do we fast track this? Because this is a problem right now across the Bradford district that many of us have been calling on, and dare I say the scale of the issue across the Bradford district would far dwarf that anywhere else. I've not seen anything else to disprove that. So we're trapped between local representatives blocking it, national government not being robust enough to have one. How do we get across this roadblock?
You keep plugging away. I'm very sorry to put it in that way, but I'm sure Lucy Allen felt the same in 2017. I don't know the extent to which your district has a cohesive, or coherent, I should say, survivor voice, because I think that was essential in Telford. I think it's essential in Oldham.
So can I just expand a little bit as well, just on the framework? Because I will absolutely keep plugging away for the Bradford district.
Forgive me if that sounded patronising. Absolutely.
No, I'm not saying it at all. But that's absolutely what I will do. But the challenge there being, if there are other towns, and it's been reported that there are approximately 50 towns or so that are experiencing or a concern of gang rape, child sexual exploitation, the most horrific amount of crimes have been taking place. And there will be some advocates for those areas that are vocal, potentially like myself for the Bradford district, or particularly Keighley. But where there are concerns being raised of around 50 or so towns, where do we end up having 50 or so individual inquiries, or is it better to have a national inquiry that is specifically focusing on those areas?
Do you want to know what's gone wrong in Bradford district? Yes, you have to have a local inquiry commissioned by either one or all the local authorities affected by it. If you want to know about the wider issues there may be, such as Louise Casey's looking at the moment, then that's a national investigation. That's what I said at the start. If you want to know what's gone wrong in my district, you need the sort of inquiry that I did in Telford and I'm going to do in Oldham.
And finally, if I may ask, you mentioned when you did the Telford inquiry that the survivors or the representatives and those that were helping feed into the inquiry were advocating for those statutory powers to be awarded throughout, even up, I think you mentioned up until the point of the report concluding.
Well, I think if I said that, advocating is putting it too strongly. Certainly they wanted a statutory inquiry in 2016 or thereabouts, and we knew, I say we, the commissioning body and I, knew that they had a very careful eye on whether we hadn't uncovered anything that we could have uncovered by statutory power. So while we didn't have overt reference by them to statutory powers during the course of the inquiry, we knew it was something we had to bear in mind. And I thought long and hard about whether statutory powers would have made any difference to my conclusion, and concluded that they wouldn't have.
How do we get across the point of it may or may not make a difference to your conclusion? Who knows, because those powers weren't awarded. But the point being here is the disenfranchisement of trust by victims and survivors in how open and how transparent and how organisations or individuals are held to account as a result of the inquiry that's taking place.
I don't understand there to have been any criticism of Telford on the basis of a disenfranchisement of trust in the lack of statutory powers. I just don't recognise that at all. Now, of course, in the Musk sphere at the moment, statutory powers have become a talisman. What I'm saying is there will be circumstances in which statutory powers are necessary and useful. But in my inquiry in Telford, they were not. Now, if you had an uncooperative local authority, yes, you may need statutory powers in the sense that you may need commissioning by the Home Office, for example. If you had a local inquiry such as I had, but unwilling participants who plainly had relevant material to give but weren't. You might then have to petition Section 15 for a conversion. But an effective local inquiry can be had without statutory powers. I know because I've done one. And Alexis J did one in Rotherham in 2013.
And finally from me, going back to the Bradford district, where concerns have been absolutely raised consistently, but dare I say ignored or even considered to be not too much of an issue by those in power at a local level, and we end up in this scenario where there is an unwillingness for a local inquiry to take place. Should the Home Secretary be considering Bradford district for a local inquiry with the ability of having statutory powers to, or utilising statutory powers to make sure it happens, if we continue ending up in the scenario where you have the Deputy Mayor for policing, the leader of Bradford Council, and others within the district unwilling to heed calls that I have been asking for consistently since 2019?
I'm not going to get involved in saying the Home Secretary should commission statutory inquiries in particular towns. All I would say about a local authority that seems unwilling to commission an inquiry of its own is that was true in Telford. In 2018, 10 people across the political spectrum, including Sean, including John Campion, the Police and Crime Commissioner, wrote a letter saying an inquiry was unnecessary, largely based on exactly the sort of things that you've talked about. We had a review then. We had a... I can't remember the name of the report. We had a... I think they'd had 2 rather than the 3 that you've talked about. We've done that. It's not necessary. But the groundswell was such that it became politically impossible for that to be resisted any longer. And that's how Telford had its inquiry in the end.
I will continue campaigning.
Chris, did you want to come in?
No, it's okay.
Can I ask...
That was, of course, the Conservative MP, Mr. Moore, from Keighley, and I will go through all of it. He was more challenging in his questioning because you will have seen yesterday I released his video that he made as a consequence of this, of the truth of the inquiry, and he was damning in his presentation. He starts off by asking about the Telford inquiry, and this is how I would judge the success of an inquiry, or at least one of the indicators. Was a single person reprimanded? No. Apparently some people were no longer in their jobs. But not a single person was reprimanded. And again, exposed Tom Crowther with direct questions. When he's exposed like that, he became very clear. His position is clear. It's not the inquiry's job. Which means it's not the inquiry's job to identify people who have specifically failed, who have broken the law, who are involved in the cover-up. What sort of inquiry is that? And Mr. Moore then asked, well, why are you always pushing this Telford-style, more flexible inquiry? Can't a statutory inquiry do that? And he says, well, a statutory inquiry is a courtroom style. However, both is possible. And the way both is possible is you speak to survivors first in the non-statutory way, and then you compile the evidence, you invoke Section 15, you go back to the Home Secretary, and the next phase of the inquiry becomes statutory under oath compelling. It's very easy. It's very simple. He's detailed. He's admitted it to himself. He says, oh, it's not easy, but it is. You speak to whistleblowers and survivors first, or you speak to survivors first in a non-statutory way. You compile that evidence and you work out where, who, where, what needs to happen, because that will draw that out. And then You go back to the government if there's a case and say, okay, we've got a serious issue here. There's serious issues with Arood Shah, with Jim McMahon, with whoever. They can only become, we can only get to the truth via a statutory inquiry. It's straightforward. It is straightforward. And he as good as admits to it. He then tries to say you can't do both. An inquiry either can do local or it can do national. And then he comes up with a whole host of examples as to what can only be examined in a national context and what can only be examined in a local context. And he uses the words granular for local. Again, it's nonsense. You can do both, because you take the learnings from the local inquiries to inform a national strategy and draw parallels. And his arguments into just nonsense. Although he does admit to a racial paradigm. So he is already acknowledging a racial paradigm here. He says it took 2 years. And he's clear yet again that Oldham made its decision to have its own inquiry separate to what has been announced in January. So if that's true, if the Oldham inquiry is its own, separate to the Home Office, then that means Oldham will be paying for it. I think one of my opposition councillors who are watching this, no doubt, particularly those who don't subscribe, don't pay me a penny, but benefit from my skills and experiences and insights. Perhaps one of you needs to ask at Wednesday's council meeting an urgent question as to who's commissioned this inquiry, who's paying for it, who appointed Tom Crowther, who removed the Telford-style parameters of the Oldham inquiry, whereby the local authority are now responsible for everything. See? Straightforward. And of course he's talking about Mr. Moore. He can't get it over the line in Bradford. He's written letters, he's written petitions. Well, mate, what you need to do is roll your sleeves up. Be prepared to get yourself repeatedly arrested by bent police officers, followed home by Islamists, and tracked down by Pakistani gangsters, and campaign and remove politicians at the ballot box. Because believe me, Mr. Crowther, contrary to what you may believe, Oldham did not want this inquiry. Oldham Council most definitely did not want this inquiry or any form of inquiry. And that is not my opinion. That is the evidence. That is the truth. It's not looking good, is it? They're trying to rewrite history already. Oldham are willing partners in this. Oldham have decided they're doing this. And he's complicit in, even though he acknowledges there are features of his inquiry in Telford that guaranteed its independence. Which is why it got trust. He talked about trust, and trust wasn't an issue in Telford. The reason trust wasn't an issue in Telford, Tom Crowther, was because the inquiry was accepted to be independent. Completely the opposite in Oldham, isn't it, Tom? Yeah. We're not so stupid, are we, mate? No one's going to commission me to advise them, I don't think. I'm afraid. I wish, but no, I don't think so. And I'm not... I've already spoken with Rupert multiple times, Christine. I know he's putting together his panel, and if you're asking me and others are asking me, it's not up to me. So it's not my style to make demands of I want to sit on this panel or that committee. I come from a place of public service where it's reluctant if I'm leading. I've been in touch with Rupert Lowe and his team, and I think if they were wanting me on their team, they would have got in touch with me by now and offered me a place on their team. And if you watch my analysis yesterday of the direction that some of that narrative appears to be going, I worry. And I worry because I want it to succeed. So that's where we're up to so far. And you can see the frustration of the MP in Bradford. Because actually what should happen is he shouldn't need the council to say, come and investigate us, we've covered up the gang rape of children. National government has a responsibility and a duty to investigate irrespective of what the local council wants. And they've trapped that poor man because he's never going to get the campaigning off the ground, is he, in Bradford? Thank you. And you know what? You've joined on the YouTube, ain't you, for the 99 pence a month. Thank you. It's great. I wish more people, if everyone joined with 99 pence, I'd, well, that's £1, isn't it? It's about there's about 750,000 people a month on average take value from my work. So if everyone paid £1, I'd be a millionaire, wouldn't I? I do well. When I started in January, I was doing well to try and clear £700 a month. And then when I went free, I lost 300 of my paid subscribers. So there you go. So please, if you're finding value in this, and we've got a chunk to go through yet, we've got another 45 minutes to go through yet, and it gets fun. I've watched this and watched this again, by the way. So I've watched this multiple times before I'm here. I'm not just analysing and commenting on the, if I watched this live, I watched it again over the weekend, I watched it again this morning. So I watched this at least 3 times in its entirety to be able to do this with you. So please, if you are finding value, consider buying me a coffee. Please consider signing up to Redwall and the Rabble, or even a super chat or something. Vimto and Kit. I made myself a cup of tea, and I shouldn't have. I'm missing my Vimto. So, right, let's carry on. No, Chloe, you see, you can go and do all that, speak to this survivor there, I'm not interested. I don't mean it disrespectfully. It's 6 years and we've got it here to where we've got it. We know this is rigged, we know this is wrong. I don't need to go and speak to a survivor somewhere or someone somewhere else. I know. The people of my town know. We've been on this journey. And you can see it here. You can see the way he's squirming.
About the framework itself. So we had the statement in January that there was going to be a framework. How prescriptive is it going to be? What conversations have you had with the government about it? What's it going to look like?
That, as you might imagine, is a question I was expecting, and I have prepared notes. I'm going to read from the notes because I want to be fair to everyone involved and not misrepresent anybody. I can provide the timeline after that, but I'd expect you'd prefer I gave it orally at this stage. I won't be able to resist the occasional comment, but I'll try and keep it entirely factual. On the 6th of January, I had a message over LinkedIn from a Telford survivor asking if she could share Jess Phillips' telephone number with me, and I said she could. Within about an hour, I had a call from the Minister for Safeguarding. This was peak musk, and after some pleasantries on her part about Telford, and sympathy on my part about how she was being traduced, I think. She asked if I was prepared to work with the government on some sort of framework, and I said that I was.
This is the 6th of January.
6th of January. Later that afternoon, the Home Secretary went into Parliament and announced that I had agreed to work with the government and with other local councils where stronger engagement with victims or survivors is needed, or where more formal inquiries are required to tackle more persistent problems. So that was really the first I knew about the nature of the work I was being asked to do.
Okay, so just to clarify that, sorry, we had a note that it was the 16th of January that the statement was made.
That was the second statement.
The second statement, right, so 6th of January was the first. Oh, okay, right, okay. So 6th of January, you get a LinkedIn message. The Minister for Safeguarding calls you very quickly after that, and then the Home Secretary makes a statement that day.
Yeah.
Okay.
There had been on the phone call with Jess Phillips an official called Christian Papaliantou. He telephoned me on the 10th with a little more detail.
Okay, this is important I do it like this, okay? On the 6th of January, the Home Secretary marched into Parliament and gave a statement in the afternoon. And that she'd recruited, Tom Crowther, and he was working with him to do X, Y, and Z. What Tom Crowther has admitted to there is that whatever she announced, the first he heard was from her announcement. There had been no discussion on the specifics of what he was meant to do until she announced it. And he'd only earlier spoke to Jess Phillips. And the only reason he spoke to Jess Phillips was because a Telford survivor had contacted him on LinkedIn, wanting to connect Jess Phillips. Now, I have had for some time, an issue with a number of the Telford survivors. They've got themselves politically involved. They see these politicians as their friends. They describe them by their first names, Jess and Keir and things like that. And they're being used as proxies. And I think this is another example. I accept it's unpopular. I'm not here to be popular. I'm here to deliver analysis that is more often than not uncomfortable. So a Telford survivor gets in touch with him on LinkedIn, connects him with Jess Phillips. Do you think that was accidental? They're already working in the background of how they could manage this situation. It's peak musk, remember? This was global news. And this was part of the government strategy to manage it. We've already got the Telford judge involved. Well, the Telford judge wasn't involved until the afternoon, and he didn't even know what his involvement was. That is the truth of what happened on the 6th of January, unless this judge is a liar. And I don't think he's lying. He's written notes down, and he's been very clear in what he's saying, and he's also been very clear what he's not saying, so you can fill in the gaps. Thank you. No one's been prosecuted. I've read the reports. I know, no one's been prosecuted. It does, doesn't it? I'll carry on. I just wanted to stop it there because it's important, because a lot unfolds here. So you know right from the off what happened on the 6th of January.
And told me the instruction would be to create a framework for a local...
Hold on.
He telephoned me on the 10th with a little more detail. And told me the instruction would be to create a framework for a local inquiry, it to be essentially basic but intensely practical, couple of sides of paper, that a round table meeting tentatively scheduled for the following week was envisaged with representatives of the 5.
Okay.
The only one I knew about was Oldham.
Okay. We don't know the 5.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was tentatively penciled in for the week following the 10th of January.
Yes, on the 13th I had another text from Mr Papaleontu indicating the round table was unlikely to happen as planned that week. He also asked how much Telford had cost.
Okay.
I let him know about the figure I recognise being 5 million. As I've said, there have been...
Yeah.
It was north of that after the 2-year review, but it certainly wasn't 6. 15th of January, a text, then a telephone call from Mr Papaleontu. This was the first mention I'd heard of the £5 million fund for 5 local authorities, to include Oldham, and an indication that the Home Secretary was to announce that. I texted him the next day to ask after the timing of that statement by the Home Secretary, because bluntly I wanted to see it.
Mm-hmm.
You're a jobbing barrister from Cardiff. You don't get mentioned on the floor of the House of Commons very often.
Oh, you could get mentioned a lot more now.
Well, he told me it was that day, and that was the 16th. And you know what the Home Secretary said on that day, but I'm going to set it out because it's relevant to what I thought my role was likely to be. She said she'd announced support for local inquiries, including in Oldham. She announced the KC audit, national backing for local inquiries where needed, that I'd agreed to work with the government to develop a new framework for victim-centred, locally led inquiries where needed, and as a first step to work with Oldham Council and 4 other pilot areas. That will also include support for local authorities who want to explore other ways to support victims, including local panels drawing on experience of the ICSA Truth Project, and national support for local inquiries backed by £5 million to get further work off the ground. Now, she went on to say, wherever there are serious problems or failings, and it's believed that local inquiries are needed, we want these areas to be able to conduct the kind of effective local inquiry that Telford was able to conduct, rather than having to start from scratch. Tom Crowther will work with 5 areas so that he can draw up conclusions about how we can most effectively learn the lessons of what happened in Telford. Went on to say that I, who did the Telford inquiry, will work with 5 areas on the kinds of inquiries they may want to take forward involving victims and survivors. It's crucial to involve victims and survivors in the design. It's important for Tom Crowther to work with the first local areas that want to take forward local inquiries in order to develop a model and a programme that can be used in other areas wherever it is needed. Now, whether or not I thought that meant I was going to be involved with Oldham, Oldham certainly did, because after that announcement they put out a press release welcoming my involvement in its local inquiry. I had by this stage had no involvement with Oldham at all.
Okay.
And I heard nothing, and so on the 28th of January I texted Mr Papaleontu, told him I was trying to reconcile my diary, having had a few weeks that were free and now coming across landmarks that I needed to see to. Asked if there was any news of when I might be needed. He replied with an apology that the Home Office had been consumed by other matters. This was when the Southport sentencing was happening. One might imagine that took a lot of effort. 5th of February, invitation from Nerys Davies to appear before this committee. I think it's right that I say that having received that and said yes, because one doesn't say no to a committee of this sort, I texted Mr. Papaleontu and told him that I appreciated an awful lot was going on. I've just had an invitation to give evidence to the Home Affairs Committee. And I said, it's rather difficult to refuse, or at least to refuse other than on the basis that nothing has happened yet. Is anything likely to happen between now and the date they propose? You understand my concern, I'm sure. I did not, I think, I didn't have a text reply to that. And on the 8th of February, a Saturday, and concerned, I used my private friendship with Robert Buckland, who I've known since we were both barristers in Cardiff together in the middle 90s, to ask him how he thought I should proceed. And he gave me Jess Phillips' number, so I texted her. I told her I had an invite in the middle of last week to give evidence to this committee. I said I'd been in touch with Christian by text but no reply, and asked if she'd be able to follow up the next week on what I was likely to be asked to do and when, and she said she would look into it. And I left it at that because I thought...
That was last week, sorry to interrupt.
That was the 8th of February.
Oh, 8th of February. Oh, right, okay. We're on the 1st of April now.
She said she'd get onto it, and I've no reason to think that she didn't. I didn't hear anything, though, until... No, actually, on the 12th of February, having had an update from Nerys Davies as to the date, I texted Mr. Papaleontu and said that this hearing was now fixed for the 1st of April, and that I would appreciate an update. On the next day, the 13th of February, painfully aware that my name was associated with Oldham, formally in the sense of a press release, but on Twitter to a great extent as well. And I emailed Arud Shah, the leader of Oldham, whose email address is publicly available. Please forgive a direct email. I thought I should introduce myself. As you know, the government announced in early January that I'd work with Oldham and other councils to set up a framework for council-commissioned local inquiries similar to the work I did in Telford. I was very pleased to be asked to do this work and look forward to it. I was told the intention was for an initial roundtable meeting with representatives from Oldham and the other councils, but this has not yet been scheduled. So in the meantime, I'm very happy to have an initial conversation with you and your chief executive, or whoever you deem appropriate. If you would prefer this to be in person, I said I was in Manchester and could accommodate an in-person meeting. And I had a reply by text message, because I'd left my phone number, proposing that there was to be a meeting to be arranged with her and her chief executive. I, the same day, had a call with Christian Papaleontu. A text from Mr. Papaleontu that day, proposing a call the next day. And on the 14th, I did have a call with Mr. Papaleontu, and said in terms, do you still want me? He said that the framework, the draft framework, was now to be ministerial and advisor drafted, but that my comment would be welcome on any draft, which he told me was expected the following week. I told him, because I thought it right to do so, that I had been in touch with Arud Shah, and expected a meeting with her. And I concluded by asking if we could continue via email rather than by text messaging. I was assured I'd have a follow-up email that day. On the 21st of February, I texted Mr. Papillon Christian, a week ago you told me you would send me an email so we wouldn't have to conduct this through text. Would still welcome that, Tom. On the 24th of February, I had a meeting at Oldham with Arooj Shah and Shelley Kipling, the then acting chief executive of Oldham, since, I think, confirmed in post, talking in very general terms about the sort of thing I've talked about today, the merits or otherwise of the double independent model, what's necessary for a local inquiry being survivor confidence, that sort of thing. We left it at that. I had an email on the 3rd of March from Shelley Kipling confirming that the council had satisfied itself through survivor inquiries that I was a proper person to conduct their inquiry, and indicating that they would confirm instruction subject to, of course, negotiation with my clerk, my business manager. On the 12th of March, Oldham press release announced my instruction, and there was formal instruction, I think, the same day. On the 20th of March, I had an email from Christian Papillon. I had spoken to him after I'd spoken to Shelley Arooj, and it's not clear to me when that was, because that was a phone call, and none of us have paper bills anymore, and frankly, I don't know if an incoming number is somebody trying to say, do you own this diesel car, or is it Christian Papillon? So there was a call in the meantime, which I told him I was instructed by Oldham. The email on the 20th of March, as discussed when we last spoke, we've been considering how we can support local independent inquiries in a way that optimises effective local action, including looking at a competed fund which could support different ladders of intervention to support local inquiries, from full inquiries, as in the case of Oldham, brackets where I know you're already engaged, double exclamation mark, close brackets, to supporting options short of a full inquiry, which could include victim-survivor engagement, effective accountability, scrutiny and follow-up, etc. As we also discussed, developing a framework for local inquiries will still be crucial to inform any decisions on the provision of supportive funding to local areas. I mentioned we were moving to a model where the development of that framework would be Home Office-led and multi-stakeholder to A, ensure we are capturing all relevant learning from local areas which have conducted local inquiries, so the framework was as rigorous as it could be, and B, to try to do this in a way that brought different stakeholders with us so they felt they were part of a process rather than being done unto. We obviously want to draw heavily on Telford's experience with input from yourself, victim and survivor reps and the local authority, and as per your suggestion, Eversheds. My suggestion had been they talk to Eversheds because, bluntly, Eversheds have done a lot of work for Telford that's now amortised on data sharing, privacy policies and the like. My team is reaching out to arrange a session and to capture and build on what Telford had produced, and we will ensure you are linked into that. I hope you would still be able to find time to contribute to capturing key learning from Telford from your perspective, and hope that there are some times in the next fortnight that you would be able to make. On the 25th of March, I had an email from Anna Carvalho-Phillips at the Home Office asking to arrange a joint meeting to discuss the framework. The same day, I emailed Ms. Carvalho-Phillips back and said, Christian identified 3 areas of work: funding for support for local intervention, including inquiries, development of a framework for local intervention, including inquiries, and Telford learning. I went on to say these seem to be distinct in the reverse of their natural order and in increasing relevance to my experience. That is, I can say nothing at all about funding, plenty about Telford, and will have to reserve whether I can comment on a framework someone else has drafted, particularly if it runs contrary to the structure of the Oldham inquiry, as it would be invidious for me to accept instructions on one basis and then endorse another as best practice. It would be very helpful to have an agenda in advance of the meeting, but am I right at least to assume that the proposed framework is a Telford learning meeting rather than a framework meeting? And the next day, the 26th, I had an email from Ms Cavallo-Phillips to reassure you we're not planning to discuss the fund in any detail. We'd like to speak to you about learnings and insights from Telford's approach. The framework will aim to assimilate learnings and best practice from successful inquiries, including but not limited to Telford, as well as feedback from local areas on what they would find most instructive to include. The aim is for it to cover core themes and related activities that local areas should consider when planning and delivering a local inquiry. However, we will be clear that while it provides a guide rail, it is not binding, and local areas should adapt their approach according to local context and need. We wouldn't be asking you to endorse the framework. Rather, we would be interested in understanding if the themes we've identified from Telford's approach are the right ones and whether there are any omissions that we should explore further. I can circulate an agenda to you in the coming days, and I had one last night. It's a discussion document, and it's for a discussion for a meeting that's scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, so I think it would be wrong to share the contents with the committee. I've taken quite some time to deal with that, but ultimately, in answer to the question, how is a national framework being developed, I would say at this stage, I don't know.
Okay.
Wow. Wow. He just owned up to being played. That's what's just took place there. He's owned up to being given the runaround and being played, and there's a lot unsaid in that. That incriminates government ministers and civil servants. And if that is not the cover-up continuing, I don't know what is. So, the Home Secretary marches into the Houses of Parliament and announces how Tom Crowther will work with 5 areas. Tom Crowther is key to this framework. So much so, even the Home Affairs Select Committee asked him about the framework because they wanted to understand it. Tom Crowther finishes that monologue off with a whole list of, they're saying he doesn't know because he's clearly not involved in developing it anymore. He is allowed to comment on it. There's a Home Office civil servant on the 10th of January who already, after Yvette Cooper has said what she said on the 6th, on the 10th already, this civil servant, Mr. Popopoulos or something, is talking about this framework being actually basic, practical couple of sides of paper and a roundtable meeting with the 5 areas that was meant to take place the week after, and he's texting to say no, it's not going to happen anymore on the 13th. Despite that, on the 15th, Yvette Cooper goes back into Parliament, 5 million for the 5 areas. 16th, Oldham Council, I think, announce it. We're working with him without even speaking to him. They release a press release confirming that they're working with a man who doesn't even know he's been hired yet. He gets Arood Shah's phone number somewhere in the middle of it. Instead of, she texts him back. I mean, that's just outrageous. He'd phoned someone of that standing. He meets with them. It's all nonsense what goes on there. It's rigged, and you can see it's clearly rigged. But that's a different conversation. He's so worried by the 8th of February on the Saturday, he's phoning one of his mates up, a judge, who gives him Jess Phillips's phone number, which shows at no point did he have Jess Phillips's phone number. He phones up Jess Phillips and she says she'll get back to him in due course. Of course, after that, he makes no more reference to Jess Phillips, so Jess Phillips clearly never phoned him back. Because if she did, he would be making reference to it. This civil servant all the time is texting him, and Crowther wants an email. Can we communicate an email? The reason why Crowther is asking to communicate an email via text message is because the civil servant hasn't even given him his email address. And Crowther suggests that also because he also makes reference to how Arood Shah's email was out in the public domain. As is her association, Tom, with a convicted heroin dealer. When you came up, did you hang out with him? Did he drive you around in his Bentley? Take you to a bare knuckle boxing match? Maybe a linked up business of his? Maybe he wants to link you up, Tom? Yeah. At some point in January, Tom Crowther agrees to work with the government for the framework, have oversight of the scheme, and in the end, we know he's not even involved in developing the framework, and oversight of the scheme has been relegated to passing commentary on it, a discussion on it, and he's not involved in overseeing the 5 areas or any of that. Maybe he did go to the mocktails bar, Denise. Maybe, you know, Virginia chicken. A shisha bar. It's worse than a farce. This is not accidental. I've worked in government. Government doesn't operate like this. Not when I worked in government anyway. It does not operate like this. The Home Office does not operate like this. They were making things up as they were going along. They dragged him in. He got excited. And now he's not doing the work he thought he was doing on a national level. And he's been dragged into a town infested by Pakistani gangsters, Islamists and bent politicians and council officers. And Tom, you have no idea, lad, what we are going to do to you. You have no idea. It's unbelievable, isn't it? It's absolutely unbelievable. Okay, there's 666 of you at some point on this 666. There's 133, 34 of you right now live with me. If you want me to continue, I'll continue. Just let me know. I'm happy to continue and carry on. There's another 2 sections left. If you don't want me to continue, I'll finish. But please, if you're here, and you're one of the menus here, please consider taking out a subscription to Redwall and Rabble. Come on, if it wasn't serious, it's entertainment, isn't it? You won't get this analysis anywhere else. You won't have anyone really who finds joy in this. I do find joy in this. It's a bit morbid, I think, but I find some satisfaction in this, and I'm laughing my head off. This is one of the most senior King's Counsels in the country who's regarded the expert in this field, and he's just been given the runaround. And he's coming to Oldham to hang out with gangsters. Okay, you want me to continue? No problem. I would very much appreciate, you know, someone subscribe somewhere maybe. It would cheer me up. redwallandtherabble.co.uk. Come on, people. Let me bring it up. That's my notes. You don't want to see my notes. Hold on. You want that? Let me just clear my screen. My note screen.
So I've got a lot of questions about what the framework might look like, but I don't expect there's a lot of point in putting them. Can I turn to Paul Kohler?
Okay, thank you for appearing. It's been very interesting. Would it not be more logical for you to draft the framework and for the Home Office to comment on that?
Can I say this in here? You may think that. I couldn't possibly comment.
Okay, point taken, okay. I know you said you can't comment on funding generally, but you've mentioned, of course, that Oldham cost at least Telford cost at least 5 million, and probably more. What's 5 million going to buy for 5 inquiries? What are they going to have to lose out on?
Well, I don't know now whether the 5 million is for 5 local authorities or whether it has turned into, what was the phrase, a competed fund, such as, dare I mention Levelling Up, where certain people thought you could direct funding to the north of England and then realised that, and I picked Saffron Walden out of the top of my head, I don't know if anyone has any link to it, but Saffron Walden decided they needed something too. I just don't know about procurement. I suspect it's run into procurement problems, but I fall back on, I just don't know.
Excuse the naivety of this question. I assumed the framework would be a sort of generic framework, but they do envisage you discussing it with local authorities?
Well, I don't think that's envisaged anymore if we look at that most recent email. And I'm painfully aware that I read it out at speed. But my most recent email the one penultimate email on the 26th did say we wouldn't be asking you to endorse the framework.
Mm-hmm. And therefore not even discussing now with local authorities, you don't think? It'll just be you commenting on you giving them private comments on their framework?
I don't know who the attendees at tomorrow's meeting will be, beyond me and a representative of Evershed Sutherland, who effectively ran the inquiry from the commissioning body's side. My understanding of tomorrow is that it's about Telford detail.
And issues such as cultural sensitivities, should they be covered in the framework? If you were writing it, would they be?
The answer is no, because the framework would, in my view, leave terms of reference up to the chairs of individual inquiries. And there may be areas in which cultural sensitivities were of acute concern and others where that issue was less important.
Margaret Mullane.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask, and you've alluded to it in the previous question with the competed fund, what incentives do you think the government should put in place for the local authorities to access it to help fund the inquiries?
I think given that I'm chairing another inquiry and may be called on to advise on others, it's not for me to say what the government should do, if you'll forgive me.
No problem. And who, again, I don't know if you could answer this now, who should be responsible at a national level for common themes from the local-led inquiries and doing a wider action on them?
Well, at the moment, it's Baroness KC who seems to be responsible for all difficult issues.
Right, okay.
And a very good choice for difficult issues.
Right, okay. So that's what you think, right, okay.
We are hoping to get her in front of the committee at some point, but we know she's very busy with lots and lots of competing issues.
Another question from me. How confident are you that the work of the HM Inspector of Constabulary and the Child Sexual Exploitation Task Force will have an impact on identifying child sexual exploitation?
Well, the task force does seem to be a success in terms of the figures. I think it was something like 25% up on arrests last year. And it is, of course, child sexual exploitation is a pan-jurisdictional offence. Girls from Telford were trafficked to Rotherham, they were trafficked to Birmingham, they're trafficked across force areas. So anything that leads to a national police response is to be welcomed. The task force seems to me to be a success.
And I'm very interested in this because we've heard from different kind of things that the committee's covered. How effective do you think regular publication of good, high-quality data in combating misinformation on group-based offending is?
It's vital. The primary recommendation in Telford was that the irony is I'd spent hundreds of pages railing against pointless committees that have been set up, and my primary recommendation was that another committee be set up. But this was involved all key stakeholders. They called it the Joint CSE Review Group, and I said it should publish once a year data about prevalence, including ethnicity. Now, they've done it. It's on Telford's website, and the next one's due in the summer, so that people can actually get an impression of what's going on in the town where they live, and I think it's vital. The one thing that I was not persuaded out of, that they took a different view than me, is that I said the locality data should be granular. And, of course, the police made the very good point that, particularly in the areas with low instance, if you got too granular about locality, the wrong people may be suspected that if there's an instance of an offence in X Avenue, that Tommy Robinson might be outside Mo the taxi driver's house with flaming torches, where in fact it's Graham who lives with his mother who's grooming people on the internet. And you know, that's about the police doing a really sensible job about it. But I do invite the committee to look at Telford's Joint CSE Review Group reports. And I would love every town to be doing those, because then you'd have a resource from which national data could be drawn and national trends could be derived.
Thank you. Robbie Moore.
Okay. First, and thank you to someone who's bought me a coffee, a joint, Red Wall and a Rabble. I've just seen it got bleep bleep, so that's the first, and the second time this evening it's gone bleep, so that's thank you very much. He couldn't possibly comment on the obvious question. Would it not be more logical if they brought him in for him to draft a framework and for the Home Office to comment? He's been sidelined, he's been used. Telford costs 5 million. How can you do it in 5 areas? What do you have to leave out? I don't know. He doesn't even know what the money can now be used for or not used for. So this is a farce, isn't it? He's not involved in the framework. He doesn't understand what the money is for, can be used for, won't be used for, whether there's inquiries or not. And he confirms that the Home Office emailed him on the 26th and confirmed that they wouldn't be asking him to endorse the framework. So the Home Secretary lied, misled. You decide. He's not a very happy man. I mean, just look at his face. Yeah, he's not a very happy man. I think that's clear. He, on the matter of cultural sensitivity, even though he shouldn't be, they avoid the elephant in the room, don't they? All the time, they avoid race. This wave took place because of the Pakistani rape gangs that we've been campaigning against. And he's decided that cultural sensitivity should be left, whether that's examined or not, should be left at the discretion of the local chairs. Now, you know and I know, if it's left at the discretion of the local chairs in terms of the terms of reference, what's the point of having a framework if it doesn't shape and inform what the 5 areas or the 10 areas are looking at? If it's left at the discretion of the local areas, then those local areas, time after time, will avoid those difficult, challenging areas of inquiry. I think that's a given. It's not for him to say what the government should or shouldn't do. It's Baroness KC who's the specialist here, and we're waiting for her to attend the Home Affairs Select Committee. But he does say the police task force is a success, 25% up on arrests, and he acknowledges that girls were being trafficked across the country, from Rotherham to Telford and so on. The judge himself acknowledges that the trafficking took place across the country. It doesn't say Pakistani rape gangs, but we know these were Pakistani men who were doing the trafficking. And there's a leading questioner on misinformation and combating misinformation, and he does himself a disservice, because he talks about how it's important. He talks about how it's important, really, the subtext is how it's important to manipulate the data in case Tommy Robinson turns up, looking for a Pakistani called Mo when it's Derek or John online. That, my friend Mr. Crowther, is called unconscious bias. The government believes in unconscious bias, particularly amongst working class white folk, towards ethnic minorities. And here you've got unconscious bias from a posh KC and members of the Select Committee towards working class white communities, and the pre-assumption of racism. Yeah? Indeed. Crazy, isn't it? Absolutely crazy. I think you're catching up, Christine, but yeah, it's a bit late in the conversation to ask for an email. We'll carry on. Please, if you're here, you're still here. In fact, most of you are still here. It is getting late. Buy me, what did I say yesterday? Oh yeah, Raja, we'll do an hour. We'll do an hour, Raja. It's 11:15. Do you remember that night where we did the all-nighter for the elections? That doesn't surprise me, mate. That doesn't surprise me at all. Please, if you're finding value, sign up to Redwall and Rabble. This analysis is only possible with your support. I'm only here because some of you support me. I'd like more of you to support me. It's £3 a month, or just pay £30 for the year, and I will be forever indebted to you. So please, if you find value in my work, subscribe, support me. Just give me 1 second. Let me just clear my tablet.
Yeah, thank you. And can I just take you back to the timeline that you kindly went through? Can I just thank you for your ability to keep going back to try and get answers from the Home Office in what seems to have been trying to get some clarity. It seems to me that the Home Secretary was almost pushed into a position of making some announcement in January to illustrate that the government was actually doing something with the public pressure that was being put on them at that point in time. And from your time frame that you were outlining, it seems to me that this is just being no further forward, and I'm inviting you to comment on this, no further forward really in understanding how the framework is being developed. Indeed, it seems if we're just communicating via text messages and not proper established chains of communication, that just would be administrative incompetence at the Home Office's end, when this is something that has got such huge public attention, quite rightly, on it. But where are we with going forward from the Home Office's point of view?
We are no longer communicating via text message and haven't been for a month. It would be wrong to say that I have no better idea of how the framework is being developed. I do have a better idea about how the framework is being developed. It would be right to say that I have had no involvement in the development of the framework.
Given the fact that your name has...
But that might be different by the end of tomorrow.
Okay, and up until today's point then, given that your name has been referenced not only on the floor of the House, but in other communication that has been put out by the government, do you feel used as part of this process so far?
No.
And
because I understand that wheels turn slowly.
Do you have faith that there will be a local audit or local inquiry into the other 4 areas that have been indicated that there will be?
I don't know who those 4 areas are, so I can't say. I just don't know.
You have confidence that, based on what the process since January, since that statement was given in the House so far, that the other inquiries will actually come to existence?
Well, other local authorities may choose to do what Oldham's done and commission those inquiries. They may commission them before the framework comes out. They may choose to wait for the framework. I just don't know.
Chris Murray.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for coming. It's very good, interesting evidence you're giving us. I want to ask about when the Home Secretary announced your involvement, she also announced that Baroness Casey would be doing this audit of existing national issues.
Yeah, I think that was 10 days after she first announced. I think that was the 16th she spoke about the Casey audit.
Near the announcement of you. So I wonder, have you had any engagement with Baroness Casey about how your 2 pieces of work will engage with each other?
No, I've been told, and I didn't include it in my timeline, but in my most recent communication with Mr Papalyontou, when he spoke about people reaching out to me to arrange a date for the framework meeting, he did say by way of postscript that he thought that Baroness Casey's team wanted to speak to me, and he thought they would be likely to be in touch. Now that was 20th of March. I'd imagine, given they're on punishing timeline, that Baroness Casey's team's got plenty to be getting on with in the meantime.
Yeah, and it was less than a fortnight ago,
yeah.
So even I wouldn't be too critical on that front. So let's think about that conversation when it happens. What kind of points will you want to be raising? How should local inquiries, a framework and a national audit, in your opinion, be liaising with each other, be considering each other's, working in synergy with each other?
Well, I understand the national audit to be a data analysis exercise. And so if there was an overlap with Telford, it would be looking at the annual reports that I've spoken about to get the best picture of what's going on the ground in Telford in the last 2 years or so.
Anything else? Any other considerations you think that the audit should...
No, if a conversation happens, I'll wait to see what I'm asked, I think, rather than guess what it might be, if you'll forgive me.
What would you ask?
What would I ask?
What they say to you, like, we're interested in your opinion about how we should take this forward.
Look, I'm convinced of the importance of data, and it will be interesting to know if Baroness Casey's review finds there is sufficient data, or if different data needs to be collected or routinely collected, and I will be interested to know her conclusions on that. I would hope, obviously, that somebody says the idea of the Telford-style CSE review group is a good idea across the piece.
Great, thank you. So just looking forward rather than retrospectively, there's been a few announcements by the government in recent months. So, for example, grooming is going to be made an aggravating factor in the sentencing of child sexual offenders.
Yeah, I sorry for interrupting you. I should point out that the much maligned Sentencing Council already includes grooming as an aggravating culpability feature on all child sex offences. They're talking about making it a statutory aggravating feature. Whether that'll make much difference when the culpability feature actually has the greater ability to move it within the group.
My question there a little bit. Let me get to the end of it. So there's an announcement of making it statutory aggravating factor. There's also a statutory duty to report child abuse. Obviously, reporting of child abuse is already encouraged. There are a whole host of measures around reducing violence against women and girls. My question is, which you correctly anticipated, what impact do you think that will have going forward on spotting and tackling incidents of child sexual exploitation?
And if I can ask, what difference might it have made in Telford if we'd had those measures in place at the time?
Which was going to be my follow-up question.
Sorry.
So well done. I mean, obvious to me.
I second-guessed you.
Duty to report. The devil's in the detail with the duty to report, obviously, and I did look at the clause in the bill. Person must make a notification if they are given reason to suspect a child sexual offence may have been committed at the time. I'm a little concerned that reasonable cause to suspect is probably not satisfied by indicators that while we've done as a country, as a people, we see these things that we didn't in 1996 or 7, and most teachers would see persistent absences, for example, as an indicator that something might be wrong. Most doctors would see multiple pregnancies in very young girls as an indicator that something might be wrong, might do something about it. Police officers are absolutely onto missing episodes. I'm a little concerned that the lower level indicators may not be reported where it's that formal. I don't think it'll do any harm. But I think a great deal of work has been done in the meantime on educating people about the importance of indicators. Maybe you don't have to get to the level of reasonable suspicion. Teachers seeing somebody who's coming in unkempt every day. That's an indicator too, for example. But you wouldn't report that to the police. And I think the police wouldn't be equipped to handle indicator reports. And if they're not equipped to handle it, but there's a mandatory report and it goes to the police, is that going to create a response by the police? Probably not. They should be reporting it in a multi-agency group, of course. The police should be taking it through. Are people then going to say, well, I reported indicators and not what I wanted to happen? Look, I'm not against mandatory reporting. Everybody says it's a good idea. The figures internationally make it clear. Number of children identified as at risk increases in jurisdictions with mandatory reporting. I'm just concerned that those professionals with day-to-day contact with children will not wait until a reasonable suspicion threshold is there, but will report indicators. That's my feeling about it.
And what about, because one of the criticisms that's come out is that it doesn't carry a criminal sanction if you fail in your duty, but it will show up on your DBS checks for future jobs around children and vulnerable people. Do you think that's the right level to sort of set sanction for failure? Because it would take those people out of the system of dealing with vulnerable children?
Is criminal sanction really going to worry the sort of person who wouldn't report child sexual abuse? It's a rhetorical question, I don't know the answer, but I can completely understand why there isn't criminal sanction there. This is about, isn't it, encouraging people to do the right thing, and it's a carrot-stick balance that's been made by others. Seems to me to be a perfectly reasonable conclusion that's been come to.
And the Chair's question about, do you think these things would have made a difference in Telford retrospectively had they been in place at the time?
Put it this way, if mandatory duty to report had been in place in Telford, I think the people who were told you can't make that allegation, it's racist, would have been emboldened to take it further. And what's more, I think the people who accused them of racism for making those allegations would probably have thought twice about it. So, yes, as I say, I can't argue with the data. It's there in the conclusions in ICSA. Where mandatory reporting exists, greater numbers of children are found to be at risk. I don't see that can be said to be a false statistic. And wouldn't we rather over-report than under-report?
So on that point, is there any danger with over-reporting, the tree loss in the forest, if there is a statutory duty to report, or is that not really a concern?
Doesn't seem to have been in other jurisdictions.
Yeah.
Thanks. And one other proposal that's come out that the government's planning to legislate on is a duty of candor.
Yeah.
This is obviously from Hillsborough, so it's from a different kind of background, but it will have huge implications here. We know from all of the evidence in recent years on child sexual exploitation that institutions are secretive, that they are defensive, that they close ranks. We've seen that across the piece. Do you think a duty of candor, a statutory duty of candor, will have an impact on that dynamic that we've seen in so many abusive institutions?
We'll answer your question.
Okay.
Which means I'm not going to straight away. But you said institutions are secretive. I should say, in Telford, the CSE response came from individual youth workers and individual police officers, if I can put it this way, without disrespect, bottom of the food chain, who just wouldn't stand for it anymore. And you had youth workers going to Birmingham in the middle of the night, the early hours of the morning, to collect children from houses where they shouldn't be because they were in trouble, putting themselves at physical risk. So while there's criticism to be made of institutions, the only reason we know about any of this is because good people in those institutions wouldn't take it anymore, as well as the parents who pushed and pushed and pushed. But I promised I'd say something about it. Duty of candor, there's two potential relevances, aren't there? First, in prevention detection, and second, in attitude to an inquiry, which sort of goes to the compulsion point as well. As to the first, prevention detection, well, duty of candor in the UK was rather the baby of Robert Francis's mid-staff's hospital report, wasn't it? And has been in place in the NHS. Now, I wouldn't dream of talking for Sir Robert, but I've seen an IFG talk in which he suggested that what the duty of candor has done in the NHS is in fact put in place a layer of bureaucracy that means people are less likely to offer meaningful apology, which is what it was all about, because there's that duty in place, and apology is the ultimate form of candor, isn't it? There's also the risk that those further down, and I'm going to use the phrase again, let me say hierarchy, are the ones who get blamed in circumstances where there's a duty of candor. As to the attitude of witnesses to inquiries, I'm not sure what a duty of candor adds, because the duty of candor is subject to protection against self-incrimination. And while a duty of candor may operate on conscience, where unsworn evidence is taken, I'm sceptical about whether the sort of people who wouldn't be candid in their answers have much of a conscience to be operated on anyway.
Do you think, looking again back at Telford, apart maybe the compulsion of witnesses to give evidence, but beyond that, do you see any value that a duty of candor could have brought in, bearing in mind that a duty of candor isn't just a duty to report, it's a duty to act?
Absolutely. In terms of the witnesses my inquiry saw, it again comes back to the compulsion point. I did not see a witness or read an account that seemed to me to be deliberately elusive. Those witnesses who say, I can't remember, wouldn't be improved by a duty of candour. I don't think it would have helped, frankly.
And then, sort of very final question, but what you said is really interesting. When you say that one of the learnings was it was people not particularly high in the hierarchy who just refused to tolerate the levels of abuse that they were seeing and enacted, we want to empower them. Do you think giving a duty to report and a duty of candour, imposing that on them, isn't necessarily making them say something that they wouldn't say already, but to argue further up the hierarchy, I'm legally obliged to do this, you have to support me as I say we need to intervene here? Does it empower them to make the hierarchy respond to what they're seeing and won't tolerate?
Well, let me preface the answer by saying the sort of things we're talking about, where we saw youth workers and the like complaining about things, and they were just told either it's racist to raise it, or you're seeing phantoms here, you're seeing patterns that don't exist. Nothing would have changed about that. I think what would be different now is the societal change, that we all accept these problems do exist and these crimes are being committed. And plainly, I can't argue against a duty of candour. It's like arguing against love or motherhood or something else that is utterly beneficial. No, of course I don't argue against it. Save to reiterate the Francis point that duties do tend to become hidebound by bureaucracy, don't they?
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving such expansive answers to our questions. You've made it much easier for us because actually you answered most of our questions without us needing to ask. But I do have one final question for you, which is there anything this committee can do to help you?
Not now. Thank you, Dame
You know where we are.
But if that changes, I'll get back to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for coming.
Okay, last bit of analysis, then we'll round it up. We've lost a few people who've gone to bed. The first round of questioning was to do with, again, the Keighley MP, very pressing. Home Secretary pushed into announcement on the 6th of January. We now know further forward, he took offence to that. Yes, we are better further forward. I have a better idea of how further forward we are. I'm not developing the framework. So it's clearer. We are further forward. What we thought we were doing in January, we now know we're not doing in March. I'm not involved. Oh, does he feel used? No, I don't feel used. You tell yourself every night that, lad, and maybe he doesn't feel used because he's seen the invoice his firm is submitting. So maybe that's why he doesn't feel used. He's seen how much money he's getting. And when asked about the other 4 areas, we might be further forward in me not being involved, but we know further forward on the other 4 areas. I don't know. I haven't got a clue. The Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, of course, also confirmed Baroness Casey would be doing an data analysis. A rapid review, wasn't it? A 3-month rapid review. That 3 months up next week, by the way. He's had no engagement with Casey. They've not talked to each other, but his defence is, oh, she's probably too busy. So you're the main judge, is meant to be leading these inquiries. She's meant to be doing the data analysis. The framework that's meant to be informed is meant to be informed by the data analysis and your experience of Telford, and you've not talked to each other. Oh my, what else was there? The last round of questions was, a lot of it was to do with the measures that the government are already celebrating, the aggravating factors and stuff like that. Well, the history shows that race is an aggravating factor, racially motivated crime. Race is an aggravated factor, has been for a long time. Not one of these bastards got done for racially aggravated. Even though they called them white slags, dirt, the culture deserved it, all of that, not one of them got done for racially aggravated as part of their convictions. The duty of candor, duty to tell the truth, well, you saw that yourself, it's a joke, isn't it? And he's concerned that the duty to report won't work because it's the caveat is reasonable cause to suspect. And as we all know in Oldham, reports of children being dragged into shisha bars that Jim McMahon, now MP, Secretary of State, knew all about was not a reasonable cause to suspect. In fact, it was limited knowledge. Someone's been raped over there. I'm looking over here. No, nothing to see. Nothing to see. Can I have, yes, I'll have some mayonnaise, some chips and a chicken sandwich and a doner kebab. Indeed, Fiona. What about helping the victims? Never mind anything this committee can do for him. And of course, the Home Affairs Select Committee have the powers to call over witnesses. And you're right. This is a farce. This is a cover-up. It's quite clear, isn't it? And I think Crowther's made his peace with his role by making sure the invoices of has sufficient zeros in it. I can see no other reason why he would not feel used or not feel exploited. Because what he was led to believe, what Oldham Council even believed, what most of us across this country believed, we now know as a consequence of his, and only as a consequence of his testimony at the Home Affairs Select Committee, that none of this is taking place. I am going to leave it there. Thank you very much for the super chat, Callum. That takes me up to, I think, about £20 for the night on here. I've had 2 people subscribe to Redwall and Rabble. I've had 2 people subscribe to me on Redwall and the Rabble. I'm grateful to the 2 people, and a handful of you buy me some coffees, samosas I call them, buy me some coffees. I'm very, very grateful. I am 100% community funded. I've been here for 2.5 hours. Please, if you take value, take out a subscription. 75 pence, the equivalent of pennies to you people, most people. Seriously, it is pennies to most people. It means everything to me, and it keeps me going. I am back tomorrow. I'm back tomorrow for an Oldham specific transmission in the lead up to the council meeting on Wednesday. So that's me back tomorrow. A very, very good... Oh, come on, it was fun, wasn't it? I know it's serious, but it's ridiculous, isn't it? It's absolutely ridiculous. Good night.
Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them. On the 20th of November 2003, James Ignatius O'Rourke McMahon was elected councillor for the Failsworth East Ward of Oldham. Deeply ambitious, he ruthlessly rose to power, and by 2011 he was already leader of the council. In 2015, exploiting a Labour Party loophole, he became MP for Oldham West and Royton. If only the people of the town knew then what they now know. Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them.